Welcome to the Alaska Report. I'm Senator Mark Begich. This show is designed to inform you about the issues, programs, and people important to Alaska. Today I'm pleased to welcome Jeff Silverman, independent producer for Blueberry Productions in Anchorage, and Dr. Rosita Worrell, president of Sea Alaska Heritage Center. Jeff recently completed a one-hour documentary film about Alaska's civil rights movement called For the Rights of All, Ending Jim Crow in Alaska. The film recently screened here at the National Museum of the American Indian for my distinguished colleagues in the Senate and the House. There were also a number of Alaskans who came to the screening. It was a wonderful event and it's a wonderful film. Dr. Worrell was an advisor to the documentary and is also in the production. Welcome both of you and thanks for being here this afternoon. First we're going to start off and I'd like to ask Rosita, do you think this film was a long time coming?
Oh, absolutely, Senator. I think it was wonderful to have this production. It tells a story of our history from a Native perspective. It also really shows that Native people themselves were actors in their own destiny. More often, we're portrayed as passive recipients of socio-cultural change, but in this instance, Native people, took the initiative and they worked within the political system to try to achieve social economic equity.
Well, what I found was interesting, someone born and raised in the state of Alaska, it just reminded me of some of the great information about the great history of Alaska Natives and the leadership, but also some interesting facts that I had forgotten. So it was a very interesting movie. Jeff, tell me what it was like, because I think you did most of the filming in Alaska, or all the filming, and used all Alaskans?
Yeah.
What was that like? Sometimes people think us Alaskans are a little rowdy at times. What was it like working with an all-Alaska crew?
Well, I just have to say I'm proud to have been able to share this remarkable story to a national audience, and really proud of the people who not only were interviewed for the film, but the cast. We shot in Juneau and Anchorage, extensive reenactment scenes where you have people in costume, in the period costume, and you're shooting at film style, and we had actors with dialogue, the real deal.
Right.
And there's two theater companies I would want to mention, Perseverance Theater Company in Juneau and Cyrano's in Anchorage. And
two good ones.
They stepped up to the plate, and we had a great cast, a lot of great actors, and so it was a lot of fun, a lot of pressure because you have to squeeze so much work into so few days. It is so expensive every day to do all this, and we had a lot of extras, but everyone was really excited to be working on this film and really proud to be part of the story.
How long did it take you to do the on-site filming and the work within Alaska? I know you had production later you had to put together, but how long did it take you to kind of put it all together and then deliver it on the streets of Juneau?
It's about to actually do the individual shoot, that just takes months and months of planning and people making arrangements for the meals, and for the craft service they call it, which is the snacks and water for people to have, and I had to go down and do location scouting in Juneau. In Anchorage, of course, it was easy because that's where I live.
Right,
so,
that's your home base.
But we go down to Juneau and look around, and we decided pretty early on to shoot in the Capitol building itself, which is well preserved. It's very much like it was back in the days when Elizabeth and Roy and Ernest Greening were working there back in the 40s. And the original room where the Senate hearing occurred that we depict in the film has been changed. It's much smaller. They've made office space, so it still looks the same, but it wasn't going to work for this. So we chose the Senate Finance Committee hearing room.
It's a good-sized room. Yeah.
Great room and lots of room to film, and just looks
too.
great. Good light, and of course the director of photography closed all the windows. It's like, oh, no, let's use his windows.
Yeah.
So we made those arrangements, and we shot 5 days. We shot a whole bunch of scenes, about 5 days in Juneau, and but that doesn't include the interviews. That's just the reenactment.
Right, because I know within the film we don't want to tell too much of the film because we want people to get ready to see it.
That's right,
when it comes up. But there's great interviews throughout that are interdispersed with the actual scenes that you've created. Right. So that's a great point. And Rosita, why? I think I know the answer to this, but why did you get involved in this film? Why did you see this as something important for you personally to get engaged in this kind of film?
I think it's a story that hasn't been told, And it's a great success story about Alaska Native people, trying to overcome the racial discrimination that was very prevalent and overt in Alaska in the first part of the last century. But as we were watching the film last night, and we had the Q&A afterwards.
Yeah.
What it said to me, that even though we were celebrating a victory of our grandparents, and also of a system that seems to work, but for some of the participants there, it opened up old wounds, and it reminded us that discrimination has not yet ended, and that we as a society, we as a state, we as a country we need to continue to work on this. But I think it's, the value of it is going to be that we can, if we work together, deal with some of the problems that we have. So
That's great. And Jim, why, you're a film director, you're a producer, why out of all the things that I know you come across your desk or ideas that you have, why did you say, this is what I want to do? Why this film? Why this message?
This was a no-brainer. As soon as I learned about Elizabeth Parakovich, I was working at Alaska Federation of Natives at the time that they first proposed the holiday and started celebrating the Elizabeth Parakovich Day. And so I started reading up on it because they wanted to recognize that at AFN, so I figured, well, I better learn about this. And there was a nice little publication by the historian Wanda Culp, and I read through that, and that was just a nice boiled down version of the whole story. And I just knew it's dramatic, exciting, it's all about justice and the triumph of social change, nonviolent social change. It's my kind of story, so I knew that I wanted to tell it, but it took a long time. It took 5 years to make the film, but I've been thinking about it since, for much longer.
There was an interview you did in there, and it was, if I remember the name, it was Alberta Skank, I think it was, which you interviewed her. She was kind of the Rosa Parks, in a way, for Alaska in a couple issues. And what was that like? And for the viewers, you might not telling too much of this show, but maybe a quick little about what she did. But what was it like interviewing someone like that? She had great, I loved listening to her and her whole story, how she told it. What was that like?
Oh, it was incredible. I was so honored. First of all, we didn't know where she was. She's right there in front of me talking, and she was such a character. She was very funny, and it kind of comes across a little bit in the film. In fact,
it does.
A few places where people are kind of chuckling and stuff, it was her telling her story, and it was so dramatic what she did that we hadn't planned on reenacting that part of the story, and I was aware of what she had done, but we didn't even know where she lived or whether she was still around. And so when we finally made that connection and went down to interview her, I'm just thinking as I'm, okay, this is another. We got to reenact this,
right.
and show what she did and bring it to life. But it was a very memorable interview, and I'm sorry to say that Alberta has passed on
away, yes.
just this past June.
We
finished the film, so we had to go back and change the ending.
Ending, right. But I think, what it came across, no question about it, that her humor, her vivid recollection of what exactly happened was so amazing to me. Let me ask, and obviously the story centers around the Jim Crow laws, but when you think about it, it's Elizabeth Parakovich and Roy Parakovich and what they did. And actually, I learned something last night I did not know. And someone who is partially Croatian, Yugoslavian, she was part Yugoslavian, which I did not know that until I saw the film, which I thought was very interesting. But to Rosita, what does it mean? I know we now celebrate Elizabeth Parakovich Day. What does that mean to you as an Alaskan and then as an Alaska Native?
Well, at a very personal level, I have to say that I have deep pride in Elizabeth because she was a Tlukahadi. She was a Tlingit from the Sakai clan, which is my father's clan. So I have great pride.
So there's a connection that's deep.
In her, right. And then also really seeing the power of the Alaska Native Brotherhood. I think a lot of people are not aware that the ANB is the oldest Native American organization in the country, and it it coalesced, to work on civil rights. And they had many great leaders, and I do like the recognition that was paid in the film that there were a lot of people who were involved in this effort, and notably William Paul. William Paul being the first Native legislator.
And lawyer.
Right.
And lawyer. I was sitting next to Senator Tom Udall, who was a former Attorney General, and he poked me and said, "See, lawyers do good work."
Right.
But it was.
Well, we like lawyers.
That's right.
In Alaska, I've told people, although it wasn't in this film, where I said that when Native people were thinking about the Treaty of Cession, when Russia sold Alaska to the United States, and we met as a group of people, or at least our grandparents met, and they wanted to know, should we wage war? And they decided we wouldn't be able to do that. So they hired a lawyer, Mr. Willoughby, and they sent Mr. Willoughby to D.C. to fight for our land.
The cause and the purpose.
Yes.
It is. I have to say, when I see that film, obviously for an Alaskan, it inspires me, reminds me of our history. But I guess for you, Jeff, what do you think when this gets on the PBS this November? What do you think the national audience? How will they respond to it, do you think?
I think
the national audience is ready for something like this and will pay attention to the message.
I think they'll be drawn in because it's Alaska, for one thing, and people are so fascinated with Alaska, but also a civil rights story that they haven't heard, so I think they'll be intrigued that way. I'm sure they'll respond favorably. We've done, we've been showing it in a couple of screenings here and there, and both in Alaska and outside of Alaska, and we have to cover so much ground that they learn so much, all packed into an hour. I'm expecting a pretty favorable response.
Excellent. Well, let's see if we can tee off of that. We got a couple minutes that we're going to take here to show a clip from the film, and I think people will get a little sampling, and hopefully they'll get excited to see it in November. So let's take a couple minutes here and go to the clip.
I would not have expected that I, who am barely out of savagery, would have to remind gentlemen with 5,000 years of recorded civilization behind them of our Bill of Rights. When my husband and I moved to Juneau, we sought a home in a nice neighborhood where our children could play happily with our neighbors' children, and we found such a house and had arranged to lease it. But when the owners learned that we were Indian, they said no. Would we be compelled to live in the slums? Even now, there are doors to schools closed to our children, and signs make it quite clear that I, as well as dogs, are not allowed in certain establishments, and many of the hotels and restaurants turn us away. Well, discrimination occurs in many ways, let me assure you. There are three kinds of persons who practice discrimination. First, the politician, who likes to maintain an inferior minority group so that he can always promise them something. And second, the Mr. and Mrs. Jones, who aren't quite sure of their social position and so are kind to you on one occasion and can't see you on the next, depending on who they are with. Third, the great Superman who believes in the superiority of the white race. Well, it is this kind of perpetuated thought that serves to segregate and discriminate. In an answer to Senator Shattuck's earlier question, do we believe that the passage of this bill will eliminate discrimination? Well, have you eliminated larceny or murder by passing a law against it? No law will eliminate crime, but at least you as legislators can assert to the world that you recognize the evil of this present situation and speak your intent to help us overcome discrimination for all Alaskans.
What a powerful documentary film. And just to remind folks tuning in, I'm talking with the documentary film producer Jeff Silverman and Dr. Rosalie DeWool of the Sea Alaska Heritage Center about the new film called For the Rights of All, Ending Jim Crow in Alaska. We're talking here at the National Museum of the American Indian, an incredible facility where the documentary recently premiered for dozens of Alaskans and members of the Senate and House. Let me, I kind of feel in some ways like Letterman or Leno when I say now off to the film clip. But it is, you know, the film, when I sat there, and as I said, I was sitting next to Senator Tom Udall, who from New Mexico, who represents a significant amount of First People of America, American Indians there. And we had some interesting conversation today, this morning, the day after the film premiere. And I'm curious from your end, Jeff, what do you hope as it plays in November in PBS's national audience? What do you hope that people, as they turn off that TV after they've watched it, what do you hope to, you know, what do you hope to come out of that? What do you think people will do, or what will hopefully their thoughts be, or what's your goal there?
Well, I want them to be impressed with what we did in Alaska, how we were leaders in the civil rights movement, that this happened, that this was a positive outcome, that the system worked, and that to be inspired. Mm-hmm. You had everyday people like Elizabeth and Roy Paratovich, William Paul, who stepped forward and overcame incredible challenges. If they can do it, I can do it. Yeah. To make change and do the right thing, speak truth to power. And so I want them to be informed and go, that was an interesting story. I didn't know that about Alaska. I didn't know that there was Jim Crow outside of the Old South.
That's right.
And inspired to say, okay, this is a good story. I can.
What's interesting about it, and it's always something that as Alaskans we remember, but it, you know, it kind of reminded me again last night that, you know, this wasn't the 60s. Mm-hmm. This was the 40s. Mm-hmm. We were decades ahead of the nation on an issue that 2 decades later became very controversial in the sense of violence and other activity. And here in Alaska, in a nonviolent approach, dealt with it through a process which was amazing. I mean, I don't know if you had that same kind of thinking there, Rosita, but I think of that and I think what an amazing story to be told of what happened 2 decades before the national civil rights movement occurred.
Mm-hmm. Right. I think the important thing here is that you had Native people, you had indigenous people, you had minority people who said we need to become educated, so they aggressively went after education. They said we need to organize politically, we need to become involved in the legislative process, we need to take action. And so they learned the system and they made that system work for us. They became the actors in pursuing this equity. I think that's a very important message.
That's a huge message.
Mm-hmm. Right.
Now, did I understand this right, that this will also premiere at AFN in October?
Right. Mm-hmm.
You have to wonder what the response will be like.
Right.
I mean, do you have any thought? I mean, I've gone to AFN, I know you have. I've done my welcome speech when I was mayor and as a candidate running for office, and you know, you kind of get up there and you look out in that audience and there's, you know, several thousand people there, and it's somewhat intimidating, to be very frank with you. And now we're going to premiere a film there that many of the people will know the players, you know, and also they'll know the actual actors who are in the film too. But what's the feeling that goes through you? What do you think the convention will be like after they see that?
Well, I know everybody knows what the Alaska Federation of Natives is in Alaska. It's the largest Native organization, and it's unlike any other organization. I don't think there's any other state that has a unified Native organization. And AFN is a great time for Native people to come together and for our friends to come and visit with us. We look at the major issues that are affecting us. And I think that this film, I think, is going to not only remind us of our history, but also I think it, like last night, if we could look at last night as any kind of indicator, I think it's also going to remind us and bring to the forefront that we still have issues that yet we have to deal with. So I think we're going to see that. I think there's going to be some mourning for, you know, like myself, seeing a lot of friends that were in that film who are no longer with us. So I think we're going to see a range of things. Plus, I think it's also going to say to us, we have a lot more to do.
A lot more work to do.
More to do. This film is wonderful, but we also have to put it into the schools. We have to put it everywhere where people, could see not only the film but also study the film. And so we're hopeful that we're going to be able to develop curriculum around that, so teachers are going to be able to use this in schools throughout the country.
That's right. I was going to ask you that, and I'm going to hold that thought for a second on education. I want to ask one other question about the AFN piece of this. Are you going to have? I know you had the Q&A here after the film. Are you going to try to do something like that at AFN? I don't know if that's the plan. Jeff, is that?
That is the plan. Yeah, to have
that
Q&A.
Should be amazing.
Right, and hopefully it won't go on too long. But once people get going.
Oh yeah.
After the film, there's usually kind of a quiet and people are still absorbing it.
Last
so
night was an example of that.
Yeah,
you
exactly.
know, I wanted to applaud, but you were kind of in this moment of taking all that information and the emotion of it, and just kind of saying, okay, what does this all mean? What do I do as a person? What are we doing as a group? And then, people then spontaneously applauded last night.
Right, but after that, people start sharing stuff. They share their personal stories, and most Alaska Natives have experienced discrimination of some manner, either blatant or not, and so you have to ask the question: how does this bear on what resonance of what they did before and the story? How does this have bearing on my life and my experience and my children? And once you start exploring those issues, you really get going. But the plan is we'll show the film and then open up the discussion, and we'll see where it goes.
Excellent. And Rosita, I want to get back now to the education piece, because I think this is also a long-lasting legacy of the film. And it's not just have a film, put on PBS, that's it. It actually goes to another stage, and draw a little bit more on how you hope to help Alaskans especially understand the struggle, and I know one of the pieces at the very end was a song that was sung, which I thought was very, well, when people see the film they'll see it. It's a very unique moment of one generation to the next on the struggle of civil rights among Alaska Native people. What's your hope and vision of the education component of this?
Well, I have to tell you is we worked very hard in Alaska to have a requirement for Alaska Native history.
Absolutely.
And I think
should
myself,
have been done years ago.
Right. Yeah, personally myself, 30 years. And so when we got that adopted, and we started looking at curriculum, there was no curriculum. And I said, oh my gosh, we've all been so focused on that.
Yeah.
So this is, I think, a great piece, that we're going to be able to use in the classrooms. But as I said, I've learned that curriculum is very complex.
Yes.
And I had no idea, because I'm, a professor and I give lectures, and I thought that's what you do. But no, teachers, I know they have all kinds of standards and requirements, and so we're going to have to work very hard, to make it and put it in a form that teachers are going to be able to use it, because we will want our teachers, not only in Alaska, but elsewhere, to be able to take this. It may not be their major part of their curriculum, but it can be a resource, for their curriculum.
I think just the whole idea that when you from Alaska's perspective, it's one piece, but like you said, on the national level, if you can just, when you talk about civil rights movement in this country, now this can be augmented in maybe a significant piece or a small piece, but the fact is how early it happened.
Right.
I think is a very interesting part of the history of civil rights movement in the country, that Alaska in a lot of ways was on the forefront, where most people in lower 48 would never have thought that. I mean, they would have said, oh, Alaska, we don't know what they're doing up there, but we have a civil rights battle in the 60s, and the reality is Alaska had already gone through a process to start moving down the path.
Well, and most people I talk to, Alaskans included, just aren't aware. Oh, I didn't know that happened up here. I didn't know. Yeah. And now they know.
Now they know. What was it like here at the National Museum of the American Indians to premiere this here? I mean, for you, Jeff, as a producer, a film director, but also for Rosita, someone who's been involved in this museum. First, you, Jeff, what was it like to bring it here, to premiere it here?
What a great feeling. I love this museum.
Beautiful.
I was here on opening day, and I remember when the first director of the museum, Mr. West, came to AFN years before it was built, and it was exciting then to actually be here and be showing something. To me was a great feeling, just incredible feeling. And where else? This is the
It's a great venue.
The first showing of it to the public, and I can't think of a better place for it to be.
Rosita, what was it like? I know you helped fundraise. I know fundraising is always a big deal with museums, but you were a part of the museum. And what was that like, sitting in that theater?
It was wonderful. You know, I thought about our work, you know, to get this museum started, raising money, but it reminded me of the mission statement, where we talked about the cultural survival of Native people, and that cultural survival was going to have to come through not only teaching Native people about their culture, but also the public, and that was one of our missions. And you know, I think, you know, I want to acknowledge Rick West, who did a great job in raising the money for this museum and, you know, leading us. But what it said to me was, we are achieving what we had wanted to do in terms of educating the public about Native Americans, about our history. So it was very rewarding for me to sit there and be part of that.
For me, my wife, she had been to the museum before, had not been here yet. So for me, it was an experience, one, obviously the film, but also to be here. And then I know there are some Alaskans that, you know, came across country to be here to watch this film. And they were very excited, and some who had memories of people in the film. So they kind of got a double. They got to see an incredible film, but in a venue that was really emotional connectivity to it that I think was very, very powerful. So it's a great thing to have that. So I know we're getting close on time, but I want to ask you one more question back on the education piece. Will teachers, you know, the film itself, how will that be available at all to, like, if as you develop the curriculum or as teachers see this in November and they want to, you know, incorporate it, will they be able to get access to the documentary? Will there be, you know, I'm sure there will be, I just don't know what that is.
Well, my PBS presenter is an organization called Native American Public Telecommunications, and they fund films by and about Native Americans and Alaska Natives. And they are putting together a educational version of the DVD.
Oh, excellent.
They're the DVD distributor, so they sell it online, and they have a whole service.
Excellent.
But they also have an educational version, which doesn't have a teacher's guide, but it has a 4-page viewer's guide. But we have just begun that road of developing. I'm hoping to work with Rosita on that in greater detail, developing the curricula, because there's a lot more material that didn't make it into the film. Some very interesting about things that have happened today, more recent events that have bearing on the long-term civil rights story. So there's a lot more. What I learned from NAPT was the broadcast is the first thing that happened. It's not the end of the line for me as a producer or the people that worked in the film. It's the beginning, really. That's the first thing. Then comes outreach and education.
Let me say, we're about out of time. I want to give a closing, but let me say that people will be looking forward to that, I know. Let me say sorry we're out of time on this segment of Alaska Report. I want to thank my guests, Jeff Silverman and Dr. Rosita Wuerl, for coming here to talk about this great documentary, For the Rights of All, Ending Jim Crow in Alaska. The film is scheduled to air nationally on PBS in November, which is Native Heritage Month, and I hope you'll take the time to watch it. I enjoyed it. I think everyone who came last night enjoyed it. Thank you for joining us for the Alaska Report. I'm Senator Mark Begich. We'll see you next time. Thanks for watching.